Welcome to Nowhere, Chapter 14. The main road leading out of the village gave a good view right across the plain towards Dara. I'd expected Uncle Mahmud to drive straight down it, but he swerved suddenly to the right and headed along the bumpy farm track that led to the fields behind the village. As the truck turned, I could see beyond the cab, which had blocked our view. 4 military vehicles, which short time earlier had been invisible in clouds of dust in the distance, were now frighteningly close. There was a big gun mounted in the back of one of them, and the others were packed with soldiers. I shivered at the sight of them. Beside me, Musa too was trembling violently. "Get down, all of you," hissed Iman. "Quick, Omar, help me with the plastic sheet." I saw at once what she meant. It was really lucky that Jabber hadn't had time to empty the back of the truck properly. Along with the tools, as well as a few sacks of fertilizer, lay a large blue plastic sheet, loosely folded, which Uncle Mahmud used to tie over the open back of the truck when it was fully loaded. I grabbed it, and a moment later Musa, Iman, Fawad and I, along with all our bags, were huddled underneath it. The last time it had been used was to cover a pile of donkey and goat dung, and it stank, but I hardly noticed the smell. I was too busy checking all around the edges to make sure that nothing was showing. There was a shout from behind us, and the truck jolted to a stop. "I'm frightened, Iman," said Fawad in a high piping voice. "Shh, Habibi." She wrapped her arms around him. "Pretend we're playing hide and seek. Keep very still and quiet." Footsteps were crunching over the rough stones of the track towards the truck. 2 men, I thought. Perhaps 3. A loud rap on the side of the truck's cab made me jump. "Papers!" a deep voice barked. "Good morning, brother," came Uncle Mahmud's slow voice. There was a pause and the sound of rustling paper. Someone coughed and spat. Then the deep voice spoke again. "Where are you going? What's in the back of the truck?" Footsteps came round to the tailboard, and there was a grating sound as someone tried to force the stiff bolt that held it in place. "Inshallah, my brother and I are going to our field down there," Uncle Mahmud said. "We're spreading fertilizer today." I could hardly breathe. My eyes were squeezed so tightly that my eyeballs ached. "You're taking that little kid to the field?" the man said disbelievingly. Uncle Mahmud coughed nervously. "Our sons have all been called up, sir. My brother's wife has to help out. How are we to feed our nation if the fields aren't farmed? We can't leave the child at home. She's happy down there playing with a pile of stones." "Corporal," the man said, "if you can't get that tailboard down, climb up the side and take a look." Moose's arm jerked violently. I grabbed it and pinned it to the floorboards, praying that the movement hadn't been noticed. The truck rocked as the corporal put his foot on the wheel and prepared to heave himself up over the side. And then Nadia, darling little Nadia, said loudly, "Uncle, you've got a funny bend in your nose." The man climbing the wheel laughed. Then the truck rocked again as he jumped down. "There you are, Sergeant," he said. "The truth from a pretty girl at last. Nothing up there, just a load of fertilizer manure. It stinks too." There was another agonizing pause, then papers rustled again. "Thank you, sir," said Uncle Mahmud. "Inshallah, all this trouble will soon be over, and we can get our Syria back again." "Inshallah," repeated the sergeant. A hand slapped against the side of the cab again. "Go on then, but make sure you're back well before dark. There are rebels all over the countryside. It's not safe for honest men to be out." Now we could hear shouts and wailing coming from the village. The policemen's funerals had already started. The sound of the soldiers' retreating feet was cut off by the truck's noisy engine, spluttering back to life. Ford began wriggling out of Iman's grasp, trying to push back the plastic sheet. "Stay still," Musa warned him. "They might still be watching." It was horribly uncomfortable being jolted around in the strange blue twilight under the plastic sheet. Uncle Mahmud was usually a slow, cautious driver, but he was racing down the uneven farm track at top speed, making the truck bounce through potholes and skid round corners. It felt as if we were clinging to the back of a dragon's lashing tail. After what felt like hours, he jerked to a halt, and we heard the cab doors open. You can come out now, children, Ma called. Oh, my darlings, thank God you had the sense to hide yourselves. I threw back the plastic sheet. The brilliance of the sun blinded me for a moment. Where are we? Is this the border? No one answered. Get out, all of you, said Baba. Pass the bags down to me. We handed over the few bags. Iman and I helped Musa over the side and hopped down ourselves. Ford huddled up against the back of the cab. Didn't move. Ford, come on, Habibi, said Ma. It's time to get down. Ford shook his head. Ford, Baba commanded sharply. Get down here at once. Ford stood up, holding his hands down to hide the front of his trousers. He saw Ma looking at them and burst into tears. I wet my pants, Ma. I couldn't help it. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. Don't be angry, Ma. Iman reached up to help him down. Don't cry, silly, she said. I was so scared I almost wet mine. And I did, said Musa. Me too, I said. Well, Ma looked resigned. We can't change them here, we can't wash them either. You'll just have to let them dry. My eyes had got used to the light now. I could see that we'd come to the end of a long track that wound down through fields, some bare and brown, others still green with vegetables. Ahead of it was a road, and the sight of it made us all gasp. Hundreds of people were walking along it. There were a few men, but most of them were women, with babies in their arms, and children trotting along behind them. A few old people struggled along, leaning on sticks, and there was even someone in a rickety wheelchair. They were all loaded down with bags and bundles and jerry cans. Even the smallest children were carrying something, even if it was only an old water bottle filled with olives. Who are they? Asked Iman. People like us, Musa answered bitterly. Refugees like us. Uncle Mahmud was climbing hastily back into the cab of his truck. I'm sorry, Hamid. I can't take you any further, he said. There are soldiers in the village. Fawzi is on her own, with Jabber, and God knows he needs protecting too. Baba nodded but said nothing. His face looked pinched and thinner than ever. Ma stepped forward and said quickly, You must go, brother. Thank God you came to our rescue. The border's not far, Uncle Mahmud said, pointing with his chin along the way the people were walking. He was already climbing back into the driving seat. Baba suddenly found his tongue. Inshallah, we shall meet in better times, Abu Jabbar, he said formally. You've saved my family. God reward you. The truck roared into life. Uncle Mahmud turned it with a screeching clash of gears, and we had to jump out of the way of the spray of stones kicked out from the back. Wheels, he raced back up the track towards the village and his farm. It was awful watching Uncle Mahmud go. The last contact with our old life was being snatched away. We stood close together, watching until the truck was out of sight. Ma looked at Baba and waited. When he didn't move, she said, Omar, take the blue bundle and the food bag. Iman, can you manage the blanket roll? Probably easiest to balance it on your head. Fuad, Habibi, you're a big boy now. Take the jerry can. Be careful not to drop it. She picked up Nadia and looked anxiously at Baba, who was staring silently at the straggling line of moving people. She touched his arm and looked round and saw Musa struggling with the straps of a small backpack. He went over to help him. Then he put one arm round Musa's waist and picked up the black clothes bag with a spare hand. It's going to be a long walk, he said to Musa. Lean on me. It was a strange and dreadful feeling, joining that endless stream of travellers. One or two people nodded, and someone called out, Welcome to nowhere. I didn't feel like responding. We're not like them, I told myself. We're from a proper family, from Basra. Baba's got, well, he did have, a job in the government. We're only going away for a bit, till the trouble dies down. We're real people, not like them. Nadia, lying against Ma's shoulder, was nodding off to sleep. How old is she? Asked a young woman who came up to walk alongside Ma. 2.5, answered Ma shortly. The woman didn't seem to notice her cold manner. Where are you heading? To Jordan. Of course, the woman said. We all are. Where are you planning to cross the border? Baba had been listening. At Tel Shahab, he said. An older woman walking ahead turned round. Haven't you heard? Tel Shahab is closed. The army shelled it yesterday. Lots of people were killed. They're trying to stop anyone getting out. I told you, Baba, muttered Musa. Where can we cross then? Asked Ma. The big border posts are all being patrolled now, answered the woman. They're shooting people who try to break through. We're going to try to get over the river. There are lots of ways through the border on the other side. The fence is just old barbed wire. So I've heard. You're going to cross the river? Baba was almost squeaking with shock. The Yarmouk? But it's right down the bottom of a ravine. And what about getting over the river? Are there boats? The woman laughed scornfully. It didn't seem to bother her that a man she didn't know was talking to her in front of other people. Haven't you realised there's a drought? The river's dry. It's easy to cross on foot. And getting down this side of the ravine up again is the least of our problems. There's soldiers popping up where you'd least expect them. They open fire on any refugees they see trying to cross. The only safe way is to do it by night. God help us, Ma cried out, shifting the dead weight of the sleeping Nadia from one shoulder to the other. From some way back, someone else called out, What's God got to do with it? I'm sick of hearing about God. Didn't he abandon Syria a long time ago? I've never thought of myself as a sporty type. I like playing football, but who doesn't? To be honest, I'm a bit greedy. Until we left Dara, I'd be on the chubby side, more like Ma, who's round and comfortable, and not at all like Baba, who's short and skinny. But 6 months of hard work on the farm had toughened me up, burned off the flab and given me muscles. Poor little Ford was struggling along with the heavy jerry can, and Iman's knees were wobbling under the weight on her head. After a few kilometres, I couldn't work out if Baba was helping Moose along, or if it was the other way round, because Baba looked ready to drop. Ma was used to carrying Nadia, but even so she kept having to wipe the sweat off her face with the end of her hijab. She'd made us wear our thickest winter clothes, and we were all boiling. Even so, I was managing fine with my 2 heavy bags, and if I'd had another arm, I'd have helped Ford out with the water too. It's not very nice to admit this, when everyone was so sad and upset, apart from Iman, of course, but a bit of me was enjoying myself. There'd been some good things about life on the farm, but it'd been really boring too. Now we had set off an adventure, a new start, travel. As the hours passed, I let myself dream. Perhaps this would be the first step on my way to Norway, to join Rasul and... Omar! That was Ma calling. I looked back to see if my family had pulled out of the stream of people and had sat down the side of the road. Only they weren't exactly sitting down. It was more that they had crumpled up. Iman was crouched over her foot, inspecting a blister. Musa was bent double over his knees, as if he was in pain. Ma had lain Nadia down on the ground, but she'd woken up and was grizzling. Only Baba was still standing. He was staring along the road with a fierce frown on his face. I'm hungry, Ma, Ford was saying, his whine about to turn into crying. The food bag, Omar, said Ma, holding out her hand. I'd forgotten that the heavy bag I'd been carrying was full of food. At the thought of it, I realised that I was starving myself. Ma unzipped the bag and pulled out a plastic box. When she unclipped the lid, I saw that it was crammed with sandwich wraps. I picked one out and bit into it. Auntie Fauzia's thick homemade hummus squirted onto my tongue. I savoured every garlicky moment of it. My last taste of Syria. Then, unable to stop myself, I crammed the rest into my mouth in a few glorious bites and reached for the next one. Crisp farm-grown cucumber and Auntie Fauzia's salty goat's cheese. Ma rummaged about in the bag again and came up with a plastic beaker. Trust Fauzia to think of everything, she said with a shaky laugh. I discovered that I was terribly thirsty too. When it was my turn with the beaker, I drank down the water in one long go and held it out for more. Baba shook his head. He'd sat down to eat and his angry frown had gone. No more now, he said. It's a long way to go. Who knows where we'll find more water and more food come to that? It was a horrible thought, and I wished I'd made my share last longer. None of us wanted to get up and start walking again, but as soon as the empty box and beaker were packed away, Ma and Baba were on their feet again. Without a word, we all stood up too. What happened next was so sudden and shocking that for what seemed like ages we all stood frozen to the spot. Shots cracked out from further up the road, and people began to scream. "Get down the ground, all of you!" shouted Baba. My instinct was telling me to run, but the rest of the family were flat on their faces, so I dropped down too. After a moment, I lifted my head to see people scrambling past each other to get off the road. 2 young men ran past us into the field behind. "What's happening?" Baba called out to them. "Syrian army post," one of them shouted back. "They're shooting at everyone, trying to turn them back from the border." "What should we do?" Baba yelled after them. "Follow us," called the other one. "The river's over this way. Jordan's on the other side." More shots and the sound of a heavy vehicle roaring into life turned my guts to water. We'd all jumped up again. Without thinking, I grabbed Musa and hoisted him onto my back. "Take the bags, Baba," I shouted, and with Musa cursing me and bouncing around my back, I lurched as fast as I could after the 2 young men. They were already way ahead, but one of them turned and called out something to the other. They stopped and ran back to us. "We can help you if you'll help us," one said. "What do you mean?" panted Baba, coming up behind me. "The Jordanians don't let in single men, unless they're with a family," the shorter one said. "Say we're with you, that we're your cousins, and they'll let us in." Moose had wriggled off my back and had rewarded me with a glare. "Baba, be careful," he said quietly. But Baba was already handing over heavy bags over to the stronger of the 2 men. Ma came up carrying Nadi with Iman behind her. The strangers politely kept their eyes away from them. "I'm Hassan Mahmud," said the taller, older one. "He's my brother, Yahya." I don't know, quite honestly, how we'd managed without Hassan and Yahya. They just scooped up our bundles and seemed to whisk us over that field. A short time later, we had left the screams and shots some way behind us, and I was staring petrified down a slope so steep it looked almost like a cliff, while far below a snaking ribbon of pale stone showed the path of the dried-up Yarmouk. "We'll never get all the way down there before it gets dark," said Baba, peering anxiously over the edge of the ravine. "It'll be too dangerous when the light's bad. We'll have to wait here till morning." "We can't stop here," said Ma. "The wind's getting up already. It'll soon be freezing cold." I looked at Ma, shocked. I still wasn't used to the way she'd started contradicting Baba these days. It seemed worse to do it in front of strangers. Yahya didn't look at her, but he nodded as if he agreed. "With respect, sir," he began, looking at Baba, "I suggest—" But we never heard what he was going to suggest, because the rat-tat-tat-tat of shots came again, close this time, and the people still on the road on the far side of the field started yelling in panic. We all ducked, as if bullets were flying over our heads, and Hassan called out, "Soldiers! They're coming this way!" So we'd no choice. We had to jump over the edge and start to feel our way down, or risk being shot. If we'd only had more time to find a path leading down to the bottom of that terrible ravine, we might have made it before nightfall. As it was, we found ourselves scrambling down falls of big rocks, with thorn bushes growing between them and slippery patches of loose stones running almost vertically downward. I was scared stiff, but at the same time I felt sort of powerful too. My legs were doing things I didn't know they could, jumping and dodging and swerving. I had to force myself not to scramble on too far in front of the others. Hassan and Yahya could have bounded down to the bottom faster than any of us, but they didn't. In fact, they couldn't have helped us more if they'd been members of our own family. Hassan was carrying Iman's huge bundle and my big bag. Yahya had taken Nadia out of Ma's arms and was singing funny little songs to her to stop her crying. Iman and Ma stuck together, helping each other with the biggest boulders, while Baba stayed with Musa. Nobody seemed to need me. "Here, give me a jerry can," I said to Fuad. "I've only got the food bag now." But he snatched it away from my outstretched hand. "I can manage," he said seriously. "Suit yourself," I muttered in response. I'd have felt a bit useless if it wasn't for the fact that I was the one who found the way down. I did it just in time, too, because the sun had dipped almost to the horizon. The sky was red, and the ravine looked darker and deeper than ever. I might have missed the path if it hadn't have been for Musa crying out suddenly. He'd slipped and fallen heavily against a rock. I turned back And that's when I saw the pale scar of beaten earth running diagonally across the steep face of the ravine, down towards the riverbed below. "Over here!" I called up to the others. "There's a way down." We only made to about halfway to the bottom when it became too dark to see properly. The only sounds the clink of stones beneath our shoes, our rasping breaths, and the distant bark of a dog. We had to feel our way gingerly with our feet, scared of falling off the edge of the path and tumbling down the steep slope below. "Stop!" Baba called softly at last. "This is too dangerous. We must wait here till it's light." No one disagreed. There was a sudden burst of brightness as Hassan took out his mobile phone and used it like a torch to light up the path ahead. "Gets a bit wider down here," he said. "There's a place we can sit." He was right. A little further on, the path opened out enough to make a sort of landing. We dropped our bags and collapsed against each other, shuffling to get in position side by side, our backs against the rock wall on the higher edge of the path. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Ford said, "I'm so hungry, Ma. My tummy's a big 0. "Well said, little soldier," said Hassan. I didn't like him saying the word soldier. Was he one himself? Would he and Yaya turn on us when we were all sitting down? Or was he one of the new kind of revolutionary, who were so cruel and violent? That's just silly, I told myself. They're nice. I'm sure we can trust them. "Omar, the food bag," said Ma. There were 9 of us now, and there wasn't much to go around. Hassan and Yaya kept trying to refuse the falafels and bread and chickpeas that Baba offered them, but they took some in the end. The worst thing was that once everyone had a beaker of water, the jerry can was empty. A sharp wind was blowing along the ravine, making us all shiver with cold. "God help us," Ma said despairingly. "We can't sit here all night." "We won't have to wait here for much longer," said Musa. "There's a full moon tonight. It'll be up in an hour or two, and we'll be able to see our way down." I couldn't see him, but he was sitting right beside me, and I could feel him massaging his leg. "Is that where you hit it when you fell?" I asked him. "You haven't broken it, have you?" "Don't be idiotic," he said sharply. "I may be Captain Incredible, but even I can't climb down ravines with a broken leg." I felt the soft weight of Fuad drooping against me on my other side. He'd fallen asleep. I put my arm round him, leaning my head back against the wall of rock, and shut my eyes. It was freezing cold. I was thirsty. The rock was brutally hard, and there was danger all around. But I was so tired that I fell asleep at once. A nudge from Musa woke me. "Look, up there," he whispered. He'd been right about the moon being full. It was well up now, and in the eerie white light I could make out moving shapes coming down the path towards us. I jumped with fright. The jerk woke Fuad. "What?" he said loudly. "Where?" "Shh," I whispered. "Keep still." It's the soldiers, I thought. They're going to shoot us. We're going to die. And then I heard a baby cry, and a woman's voice quickly hushed it. I wasn't going to die just yet, after all. The strangers were us, people like us, escaping to the border. Our whispers had woken the others, and a few minutes later we were on the move again. Now, looking back and up in the bright moonlight, I could see a whole long line of people, hundreds perhaps, picking their way down the steep, treacherous path. Nobody shouted. Nobody cursed when they slipped. Everyone was creeping as quietly as they could, terrified of attracting the attention of the men with guns above. I couldn't help myself running on ahead. I was the first to come off the slope on the flat beside the river. My knees were so tired that I kept stumbling, but I felt so triumphant that I didn't care. "Look! Lights! Up there! They must be in Jordan!" I heard Iman say behind me. She broke into a run towards the riverbed. I nearly ran with her, but more than anything I wanted to share this moment with Musa. He was still on the slope, limping worse than ever. I ran back to him and waited till he'd reached the flat ground. He'd staggered and would have fallen if I hadn't caught him. I could see he was in pain. "Big moment, eh, little brother?" he said, watching the rest of the family starting to pick their way across the boulders that covered the floor of the dry riverbed. "Shouldn't there be a band? Music?" "Shut up, you big softy," I said. "Now, do you want to be a martyr and stumble on those rocks till you've cracked the other leg and had your head blown off by a sniper? Or do you want to get up on my back?" He pretended to think for a second. Hard choice. Just this once, I'll let you have the honour of being my beast of burden." So Musa rode me across the Yarmuk River towards Jordan as if I was a donkey. And halfway along the easy path that led up to the slope on the other side, Jordanian soldiers ran down to us. They picked up Musa and Fuad and carried them up and out of the ravine, leading us all in to another world.